As a historian, I have to take a larger happening, dissect it and organize it to make it more palpable to my readers, and that can obviously be difficult. Events bleed into one another, and following each thread to see where it leads it's time-consuming, it's tedious. And that's not the added task of having to sift through people's testimonies to look for inconsistencies and lies. And many of the people I've interviewed, they're still suffering. Trauma can color memories, make things stand out starkly, and erase everything else. It can halt someone's emotional growth. Several people I've talked to still speak, and they still dress like they were back then, and keep them in the dark. Honestly, I've had moments where I've wondered what the point really is in all this. So many people don't care. So many people are stuck in the quagmire. And I'm certain there's more suicides if the U.S. government hadn't started punishing the loved ones and friends of those who did it. But whenever I think that, whenever I get into that thought cycle, I make myself do it anyway, because not everyone has surrendered themselves to merely existing. There are people still struggling to improve their situation. These documents are vital in not only learning where we were back then and how this all came about, but it also shed a lot of light on the weaknesses of our enemy. So with that said, I've tried to organize the events that led to the fall of America as best as I can. Number 1, the first attacks. Number 2, the local police's response in the evacuation of Holliston. Number 3, the military's involvement. And number 4, Gestalt's counterattack. From there, we can move on to what happened to the rest of America leading to its fall. Now, Howard Klosk and Alice Evans' phone calls gave us a fairly good idea that the first few attacks started between 1 and 2 in the afternoon, which adds up to when the first video was uploaded. The video, which was posted on Facebook, was taken by Theo Brandt, a single father who was at the local park with his son, Matt. They were celebrating the boy's 8th birthday, and Brandt was live streaming the event for his family, who were away at the time. Because the man and his son were both taken, and with zero interest from any surviving member of his family, I'll recap the events of the video as best I can. The first few minutes are dedicated to Brandt and his son talking to their relatives, thanking them for their well wishes, asking them about how their days were going. They're all as happy as one might expect. After a while, Matt wanders off to the playground equipment, and his father sets the phone on a bench, and he goes to play with him. The two spend their time talking about their plans for the rest of the day and talking to people. All the while, the wind starts to pick up. It's honestly just as bad watching it the second time as it was the first. There's this awful helplessness watching these two enjoy their day, even as elsewhere in town the first attacks are beginning. Theo is holding Matt up so that he can reach the topmost bars of the jungle gym when a flyer lands out of sight of the camera. The two of them see it, though, and react accordingly, with Theo seeing the incoming attack and turning to shield his son from the blow. Flyer charges into view, rams into him, and begins tearing into his back with several mouths, which extend tube-like from the front half of its body. Father and son scream in unison. All too quickly, Theo lets go of Matt, sobbing, hysterical, turns and runs. Several more flyers land, and in his panic, the boy tries to climb up one of the slides. I wish I could say that the stream ended just as the flyers were reaching up into the slide, but it didn't. It didn't, and that's all I'll say. The footage was taken off Facebook for obvious reasons, and then it reappeared across various sharing sites before a major news group got a hold of it and decided to run with it once their sources got wind that state police had been called in for assistance. At the time, they ran the story under the assumption that it was a hoax. I mean, maybe promotion for a new movie. It was in very bad taste. Obviously, it wasn't. For a time, they ran with it. Even when the second and third videos surfaced, and all the other reports started coming in, leaked statements, videos, pictures taken by refugees and military personnel alike, and the tensions grew. And then came the next two videos. One taken by an unknown civilian, which showed several basic constructs emerging from the woods onto their property, the most prominent among them being a half-flayed deer, with the twisted body of a woman hanging backwards from its upper torso like a ghoulish tongue. This image would prove one of the most lasting, alongside the pictures of the Treaters' first attack. The Gestalt advancing through the Panama Canal and the burning of New York. The other, taken by a local officer, which was dash cam footage of two flyers prying the roof off of a car and taking the people inside. I couldn't find anything on the first person, but a friend of mine, who wishes to remain anonymous, was able to locate the second. Her name was Amanda Hughes. She was an officer stationed at Halliston and is, I believe, the only survivor amongst the few first responders. It took a little time before my friend and I were able to find out where she lived, but we did. She was living in one of the bunkers, so we went armed. We found her in a little room crowded with box fans and air fresheners. It was a mild day by Antarctic standards, but she clearly hadn't left in quite a while, and she didn't seem the sort to clean up after herself, so you can imagine what it was like. She was sitting in a recliner, pale and dirty. She was high, not on anything prescribable, and we didn't really know what to do, so we sat and we waited for her to come to. She was obviously terrified when she did, but when we told her what we were there for, she mellowed somewhat. I'd come with a list of questions, but when she collected herself, she told me that it was karma. It was karma catching up with her, and that she needed to confess. Here's a transcript.
I was never really a part of the team. Not like Whitney or Fallman or Jared. They were the ones who went out day after day, keeping peace in that little nothing of a town. I could shoot, but I usually stayed behind a desk and took calls. It was embarrassing. Do you know how many crazies there are in a small town? More than you think. That's why I didn't believe either of the first calls. I mean, some woman calling in from a rehab center telling me that there were things flying around and snatching people up and carrying them away. And then there was the jogger. The man called into the station at 6 a.m. to tell me that his dog had gotten stuck in a bear trap and then got carried off by a giant spider. What was I supposed to believe? I told them both that I'd look into it, then filed it away as weird townie crap. I didn't mean to tell the Sheriff Johansson, I swear I did, but I didn't get around to it because then all the other calls started coming in. An old woman saw strange animals in her backyard, some guy who lived outside of town saw a big tumor in the sky, surrounded by the ash cloud. A little boy said that there were monsters in his house. I start fielding them after that one, actually giving them to people. People start heading out, I call the sheriff and tell him what's up. Then Jared radios me, he's up looking for that kid. There's nothing but blood on the ground and a bunch of broken windows. He's really upset and now so am I. He's still looking when he sees the treader out an upstairs window. He and I both got to see it before it landed. He starts telling me what he's seeing and I'm trying not to believe him. But I'd known him forever and I couldn't convince myself that he was lying. I'm still trying to figure out what I think when I hear someone scream right outside the station. It sounds like it's a long way off for a second, then it gets louder, and then it stops. Whitney was with me. She was getting ready to go out with Fallman as backup when she heard it. We all go to the front door and there's someone lying on the pavement. all crumpled and bloody. I can hear him crying and trying to scream from inside. Of course, Whitney tells Foreman to get a stretcher and then goes out there to see if she can help. I see her get to him, see her kneel down to check him over, and then I see a shadow above her. Like a personal rain cloud, it gets darker, and then one of those things drops like a missile, and BAM! Grabs her with its ribs and flies up. I swear to you, I felt like I stroked out. I just stood there like a statue. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't even breathe enough to scream. Foreman comes back with the stretcher, sees that Whitney is gone, and goes out with his gun drawn. Same thing happens, only he gets off some shots, but there's just one of those things, and they take him too. It felt like the world fell away from under me. I remember going into the sheriff's office, locking the door and just staring into nothingness until it all hit me at once. I screamed and cried until I threw up all over myself. Then I crawled under his desk and curled up into a ball. Some cop. I stayed that way for a while. I could hear the phones and comms going off in the other room until, one by one, they all just stop. Jared. He's the one who got me out of it. I heard a door slam open, then he started calling for me. I went out and he looked like I felt, like the world was ending and we were trapped in our burrows while the water came flooding down. He was shaking. He never shook, and I smelled vomit on his breath. He told me that we had to leave town, leave the state, because there was something big out there, bigger and worse than the other things out there. I nodded and went along. He told me to get one of the big guns from the cabinet, said that it wouldn't kill any of them, but the firing power might knock them back, tear them apart, give us time to run. We head out, the sky's gone gray, but it isn't raining. There are people screaming further in, but everything's quiet where we are. There's nothing left of Whitney or Foreman, just puddles of blood on the pavement. We take my car, Jared drives because I can't think properly, and he's still got some adrenaline in his system. I could hear them behind us, and on either side, I didn't look out. I just shut my eyes until I heard the car come up behind us. There was a family in there, mom, dad, and a little girl. The dad was driving, he was crying, the mom was sitting in the passenger seat with a towel or something pressed to her throat. She was bleeding out, and she'd gone completely gray. The girl was just staring, looking out at nothing. There was blood on her shirt and, something stuffed in her hands. I couldn't look away. I saw the shadows move up over the top of the car. I screamed again, but of course they didn't hear me, and those things just crashed down on top of it and started peeling the top off. The dad had a gun. He shot at them. I think he actually managed to hit some of them, but it didn't matter. They started lifting the car off the ground, but I guess the top was too beaten up, so it just ripped off. You know, there was a moment, just a second, where I thought for sure that they were gonna get away. They'd leave those things behind and we'd all get out, even if nobody else did. But they didn't. I saw the father realize what was happening. I saw him train his gun on his daughter. And one of those things caught him by the wrist with one of its mouths and took the whole hand before he could fire a round. Then they took them. Jared took a shotgun from the back, stopped the car, got out, and started firing. Told me it was useless, and not 5 minutes later, he did it anyway. He managed to take the wing off of the one holding the little girl, and it dropped her. Then he turned to me and shouted, "Help me get her in the car." He didn't. He turned away right after and went to help her. He went to help her when those things were still there. I didn't have time, and she'd fallen from 10 feet up. I heard her legs snap, and she didn't cry out. She wouldn't have helped him get her up anyway. They picked her back up, and him too. I remember. God, he was screaming, and he was screaming. He'd been to Iraq. He was the second oldest next to the sheriff. He'd seen things. And he screamed like he was a kid, and none of that had happened. The girl didn't scream. She didn't fight. It took 2 flyers for Jared, 1 for her. I couldn't have helped. Don't you see that? There was no way I could have done anything to those things. Everyone knows how hard to kill they are. And we didn't even know you could kill them. What was I supposed to do? Die for both of them? Get turned into more of it? I couldn't. I took the dash cam with me though, and put the footage online. For what good it did. Still, things still went to shit, but I owed him. I knew I had to do something, make up for it somehow, like it matters. I'm a coward. I knew that then. I didn't want to admit it. Maybe that's why I never fit in with the others. They all knew what I didn't want to admit. There's a really old saying, a coward dies 1,000 deaths, but a hero dies only once. But what if you don't die? Every day I wake up and I remember how disgraceful I was that day. What I let happen to the people I worked with. It's like you live your life getting slapped every day. But I'm alive, and I'm me. As much as that counts for anything. But what if they're all still alive? Whitney and Jared and that family? Just as a part of that thing? I'd rather hate myself for the rest of my life. At least it's mine to hate.
I left Miss Hughes's apartment shaking and frustrated. I'd heard that theory before, and I hate hearing it brought up. And I also don't know what to do with her admissions to us. Law was never my specialty, and the justice system has become even more convoluted since the world fell apart. I could give it to a policeman who's a friend of mine, but I don't know if I should even bother. Still, her story gives us a new piece of the puzzle. The local police's response to the situation. Now we need the military perspective. Thankfully, we found 2 out of the 6 who escaped, who were willing to speak to us. The first name is Armin Perez. He's a top-ranking police officer, also a Marine, who served in the first military confrontation against the Gestalt. When I told him about what we were trying to accomplish here, he was more than willing to tell his story. 2 in a week. Very refreshing from the usual. I was feeling unwell that day, so one of my associates, Nora Agby, conducted the interview in my stead.
Has started. Okay, can you tell me your name for the record?
Armin Perez, formerly a corporal of the United States Marines. Now I'm a counselor for the GC. I work here and sometimes I coordinate with some of the others in Africa and China. Do you need any more details before we begin?
No, actually. Can you start by telling me how your day started?
I woke up depressed. My mother-in-law had called me the day before to tell me that my wife was in the hospital because she'd caught a stomach bug. And with that, on top of the morning sickness, she was going to have to stay another day or 2. I hated being alone back then. I've never been able to slow my mind down, you know? It just doesn't work like that for me. So even while I was suiting up, I was thinking about the baby. If it was going to be okay. If Raina was going to be okay. What I'd do if something happened.
Did you talk to anyone about it?
With who? We'd only moved in a year ago. Gotta trade in the Texas heat for New England cold. And lose all my old squad buddies at the same time. And it was a little northern town, so there weren't any other people like us there, and yeah, most of the people were really nice, but some weren't.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I guess I didn't get that.
You guess?
I'm not very good at stuff like that.
I see.
Can we please get back to the interview?
Yes. So, as I said, my wife was sick and I was worried, so I didn't start off the day right at all. And then, the first reports hit the internet. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. There were the videos, of course, but a lot of people didn't believe what they were seeing. And the ones that did ended up arguing with the ones who didn't. So that ended up distracting from things, and that's not even counting the disappearances and the testimonies from Aiden and Alden. Eventually, a squad of state troopers went in and didn't come out. And that got some gears turning. Some higher-ups at the Department of Defense decided to send in a drone to scope the place out before they decided on what to do.
Did you see the footage?
Not at the time, but we got to see it in the debrief. By then, people were talking about it like it was Bigfoot. A lot of whispering, a lot of fudged details, but I got the gist that it was bad in a way that nobody there could fully come to grips with, if they believed it at all.
Will you get in trouble if you describe what you saw on the tape? I mean, is there an NDA or something?
Nope. It wasn't much until the end. Just an aerial shot of a town square that looked like a ride had passed through it. Broken windows, overturned and abandoned cars, busted doors and bloodstains on the ground. But no people. Eventually, the drone cleared the town and got maybe a quarter mile into the woods when one of the flyers snagged it. The camera didn't catch much, just a wing and 2 hands, both lefts, one belonging to a white man, the other a black woman.
How did you react to it?
I reacted the same way most of the other guys did. I wasn't sure if somebody was pulling a prank on us. I mean, they had, looking it over to see if it was legit, but they hadn't gotten back by that point.
But they still wanted you guys to look into it?
People had disappeared. There were hundreds of people calling nearby police stations, army bases, news outlets, taking to the internet, people who'd lost someone or thought that they had, and people who'd actually seen things. And there were a lot of pictures and videos still trickling in, and nobody could fake that many disappearances, so they were going to do something anyway. Say what you will about the old government, but allowing a potential terrorist threat to go uninvestigated wasn't really in the cards. I remember how tense everyone was the day before we were supposed to be deployed. Yes, it always happens, but this felt different. Instead of sitting in a tent or riding out to some desert somewhere far away, we were at Fort Devens. We were home. We couldn't look forward to coming back. We couldn't carry that hope for familiar soil with us. We were surrounded by men and women, civilians and feds, watching their phones or TVs and getting more and more jittery and worried. You'd pass clusters of people whispering, praying. You'd hear people venting or crying from behind closed doors, or find people throwing up in the bathrooms. Every hour, on the hour. It was like another layer of disbelief was being peeled back. People started off by saying that it wasn't real. But by the 3rd day of red tape and whispering and new footage and interviews with people who looked too broken to be faking it, a lot of those people were starting to just sound desperate. I had to keep to myself. I was having nightmares and feeling sick, so I started the day wandering around or sitting in my bunk with my iPod. I just listened to music and not think, because I knew that thinking too much would land me in the same position as everyone else. It didn't work, before you ask. Every day there was a new argument. People were saying that it wasn't real because it hadn't moved in on any other town since the news started coming in. But most of the nearby towns had been evacuated by then, so that defense was worthless. Other people were still arguing over whether or not it was all real. Only things started to get violent. We had to split up a few fights. Someone had a knife pulled on them, and they had to arrest a man for beating his wife unconscious.
Did anyone, any of your soldiers, the ones who were serving with you, have bad reactions to the news?
You mean extreme reactions? Because none of us reacted well to what was going on.
Yeah.
Then yes. One guy let himself get court-martialed rather than go out there. Did it the day before we were supposed to head out. And before that, one of my teammates, Richard Cosgrove, got so worried that he ended up breaking down in the mess hall in front of everybody. Not many of us wanted to go, but if we didn't, then somebody else would have had to. We'd all get in serious trouble, and there'd have been no point in the end. We left by helicopter before the sun had risen. We'd been given the usual equipment, plus high-end gas masks. Some people thought there could have been a gas leak or some experimental hallucinogen that a bioterror group might have been using, and some suits to go with them. They also gave us thermite charges. There were 14 of us total, split into 2 groups of 5 and 1 of 4. We hadn't been able to replace the guy who freaked out in time. I was in one of the 5 strong groups. It was me, Matt Bernetti, Peter Cosgrove, Maya Bomer, and Arne Voigt. I'd known Bomer and Voigt the most. Voigt was an immigrant from Poland, so he knew how it felt to be isolated and off from everything, even if our stories weren't all that alike. Bomer was nice, and not like Marina. Marina is what my father called a spitfire, a heckler in a way that's always going to be a comfort to me. An athlete. Maya was quiet, stoic, I guess. Not much for pep talks, but she was always there. Alongside Voigt. Told me jokes only she found funny. Told me secrets about the people who'd say stuff to me. Looked the other way when I let myself get even. They're good people. My team touched down in a little camping site out to the woods in the southeast of Halliston. The other 2 groups, Fisher's and I can't remember his name, I'm sorry.
I can find out later.
Alright, Fisher's group was canvassing the area where the school was. That was to the southwest, and the last group was taking the woods where Howard Close's house was, where he reported seeing the ash cloud. There were drones on standby too, armed ones. Bernetti thought it was stupid, but the guys they were supposed to protect didn't. Neither did I, for the matter. The place was quiet. Nothing there but thick forest and a dirt path that led into the town. The walk there was disquieting. We were hemmed in by these tall trees which were all bare, so we could see just how far it went. The ground in there was covered with leaves, just this sea of red and gold and green. It would have looked beautiful if there were any sign of life in there. But there wasn't. No squirrels, no birds. Nothing but the breeze moved those leaves and the tree branches. And it was quiet, too. Quiet in that way that you always see in movies or read about in books, where the silence is so thick and so foreboding that you want to say something or make some kind of sound to break through it. But at the same time, you are too worried what might happen if you do. So you keep your mouth shut. I remember taking it all in, thinking, I'm going to have to fight today, and feeling this tightening in all my muscles and in my gut. The walk wasn't that long. Fisher and the other group radioed in halfway in, and we all nearly soiled ourselves, but nothing else happened. The residential area was just as quiet as the trail had been when we got there. We looked so out of place. A platoon of soldiers armed with rifles and grenades, canvassing a quiet little suburb with white sidewalks and perfectly square houses. Then again, even though it was subtler than most I had seen, there were still signs of violence. A fence knocked over and reduced to splinters, green lawns turned to mush by lots of hands and feet, vacant windows, a car flipped on its side with its doors torn off, front doors caved in, a pool of blood drawing flies in the middle of the street, torn clothing and shoes in gutters. Fisher had already made it to the school with his group, and they called in to report the same kind of thing. Then the last group, Perchout, that was his name. Perchout chimed in to say that they were close to Close's house. They had seen something flying far overhead, but couldn't be sure what it was. Everyone went quiet after that, and we started searching the houses. Some were ransacked, some were just empty. Sometimes we'd find a collar lying on a porch or kitchen floor, or a splintered door leading into a room where the person inside had tried to put up a fight. We found food rotting in countertops, guns laying in disassembled piles, bullet holes in the walls, bloody clothing all torn to shreds. The only things we didn't find were bodies and broken glass.
Glass?
Yeah, even with all the windows broken, we never saw or stepped on a single piece inside or outside the rooms their windows led to. Wish I'd seen it sooner. Not that it would have helped. So, we kept moving, and each house we left made something in my chest tighten more and more, until by the 10th house, I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I've felt that sort of thing before, but never as acutely. Everything about the place...
Can you elaborate on your worry, I mean?
I guess it was because it was there. Not in a desert 1,000 miles away, but in a little suburb, like the ones me and my family had lived in since I'd been born. Those places were so similar, but they each left me with so many memories, good and bad. And seeing this violence, without an enemy to fight, to stop, it got to me.
Oh, thank you for your help.
Anytime. May I continue?
Yes, please.
Everything about the place was making me nervous. And that was before I noticed the smell. It was like the most cloying, pure distilled form of nameless chemical you could imagine. It didn't smell quite like bleach, but it did smell a little bit like bile. It wasn't powerful right away, but the longer we stayed, the stronger it seemed to get. Sometimes I wake up and I swear I can taste it in the back of my throat. There were 5 houses in when I heard voices. They were muffled, but they sounded close by. We looked around, checked in a few windows before we were able to figure out which house it was coming from. And before you ask, the house didn't look like anything special. Just another white 2-story with a concrete stoop and empty windows. The only difference was the lawn was more overgrown than the others. We went around the side, using a kind of alleyway between that house and its neighbors, keeping low and listening as best we could. Bummer found a window at ground level and scoped it out. Then she and I went in. It was like walking from a blizzard right into the heart of the Amazon. The air was thick, humid. That chemical smell was so much stronger. It was like the fresh air couldn't beat it back. We were in a living room with shag carpeting, and the stuff squished under our boots. The voices were clear now, and after a minute of listening in, I felt like I'd taken a downturn on a carnival ride. They were speaking English mostly, but they weren't saying anything that made sense. Just random words. Like a predictive text or what a stroke victim would say. Their tones were all off, too loud but not angry or happy. Their inflections were all off and there was no flow to their conversation. I think that was the moment when I knew that I was going to regret distracting myself and denying what was happening. I think Bomer felt the same way. She was pale, and when she brought out the fiber optic wand and looked under the door, she just let the thing drop and walked back, mouth open, eyes so wide you could see the red around them. I couldn't help it. I bent down, took it up, and looked in. It was sitting at the kitchen table, or I guess parts of it were. It was a woman, 2 men, and a child. All of them were naked. Their skin was flushed and wet, like they had the mother of all fevers, and they were just pushing garbage, rotting food and animal parts around on plates, and they had these tubes coming out of the tops of their heads, like they were the ends of an angler fish's lure. The tops of their faces were all stretched up, like melted plastic. You couldn't see their eyes. One of the men and kids were so severe, you couldn't see their eyes, but you could see most of their gums and the stuff above it. They were just sitting there, acting like nothing was wrong, gibbering to each other like mental patients, while the thing connected to the tube sat in the part of the floor that had broken through and breathed. Bomer had been lucky. She hadn't screamed. I wasn't, and I did. I was in the process of turning when I heard the gunfire. I rushed to the window. Bomer was throwing up, and I was feeling the world spin beneath me. And I got there in time to see Benetti getting dragged into a basement window by a long, red tentacle that was alive with moving fingers. He fired into it, and something in that basement groaned. Then the foundation started to crack, and the dirt was bulging up. The door behind me burst open. I heard 4 voices moaning alongside the thing in the other house. Then Bomer had grabbed me and thrown me out of the window and followed me. Brunetti was screaming. Those fingers were digging little bits of him out. He was going pale, and I saw his gun had jammed at some point. So I lifted my gun and emptied a clip into the tentacle and severed it. I made that thing down there scream. Then Cosgrove had pulled him free, and we were all running back the way we came. As we ran, we could hear things running along the roofs or opening doors. Something on a rooftop threw a big shard of glass through Bomer's cheek. I turned and saw something red and wet and shaped a little like a pillar glide across the roof before it started slinging more glass at us. I also saw doors opening and faces popping up in windows. I heard things start to scream in their houses. Something really big started moving behind the row of houses. Something else, probably that thing in the basement, started tearing its way out of the ground. I could hear earth churning. I tried not to look back more than I had to. It was bad enough in those few seconds. They had to put me on a watch from those few glimpses. We were halfway to the trail when one of them blindsided us. A dog with a woman's head. We heard it coming, but it went under our defenses and latched onto Brunetti's leg, trying to pull him out of Cosgrove's arms. Voight blew it apart with a shotgun blast. But there were others like it. Of course it'd be a whole pack, coming up on us fast. So we had to deal with them. Not like a dog, not really, but definitely not human.
Mr. Perez?
I thought I could brute force my way through this, just get it over and done with. Like being sick. But I can't. I need a break.
Wait, a recording is Recording has resumed after a 20-minute break. Mr. Perez, can you keep going?
Barely.
Okay, you said that you and the rest of your troop took out those dog Gestalt, right?
Is that what they're called?
I don't know. The forums have names for all the documented repeating variants of Gestalt, but I can't remember them.
Forums? That thing has fans?
More interested people than fans. Would you call a criminologist a fan of crime? Or a psychologist a fan of mental health? I mean, there are some people who are too young to understand, or people who saw things back then and got very, very wrong-headed ideas about it. But there are psychos everywhere. I mean, just because the world's been reshaped doesn't mean that the normal human evil is gone forever. Races and classes and cultists are still around. They probably always will be.
You sound like you've had some experience.
With who?
Any of them.
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure all the time. I have trouble reading and understanding other people sometimes. But I met a few people who thought I was uppity, and I've talked to a few people who think the Gestalt is God and want everyone else to become one with God by joining it.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. There's nothing you can do for people like that. All right, so you killed those dogs. Then what happened?
We disabled them. I'm not sure if anything short of fire or poison can kill them.
All right, so you disabled them. What then?
We kept running. Up the hill to the trail. We radioed the copter and tried to get a hold of the other teams, but Fisher was fighting too, and Fairchild's line was just dead. We were maybe a third of the way up when we heard wings above us. Me, Voight, and Bomer looked up and started firing the instant we heard a swarm of those torsos, the flying ones. We hit some of them, but they weren't there for a direct attack. Instead, I saw their ribs open up, and in the next second, something hit the ground right in the middle of our group. Then I was tumbling ass over end with a dozen pieces of glass through my hands and face. The concussion from the bomb threw us apart. Me and Bomer were thrown backwards, so we stayed on the trail. Voight went flying into a tree trunk to the right of us, and Cosgrove and Benetti landed in the deadfall to the left. I was up first, Bomer second. The shrapnel had torn her hands up, taken off a finger and taken an eye. I was only slightly better. I only lost an ear and a chunk of my scalp. Not that you can see it with the hair in the way. The world was spinning. There was this awful smell, worse than the one in town. My skin was burning and I felt like I couldn't breathe right. I remember how the world was spinning even as I got to my feet. How the air felt too thick, like I was underwater. Bomer was in a bad way, but she caught my attention and pointed me at Bernetti and Cosgrove. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear her over the ringing in my ears. Still, I understood what she wanted me to do, and I made myself start to jog towards them. Cosgrove was sitting up, the leaves falling over him. They were so thick down there they came up to his waist when he stood up. He was bleeding from a head wound, and one of his arms was broken, probably in a few places. Benetti was lying half in and half out of a drift, pale as milk, his face all cut up from the glass. I called out to them, told them I was coming down to get them. Then I started to look for a way down. My body wasn't cooperating with me. My fingers felt like somebody else's. My throat was burning, and so were my eyes, but I still tried. But it didn't amount to anything, because by the time I had found a root to use as a handhold, all hell had broken loose down there. I didn't hear the trap go off, but I did hear Cosgrove shouting. There was a ribcage clamped around his shin, one with some of the muscle still on it, like a living bear trap. Cosgrove grabbed a hold of one of them and started pulling it back. Then all the others sort of shivered and then bit down harder. He flailed and jerked back, and I saw something under the leaves pulse, like a ripple that went through the leaves, and that was all the warning I got before the force just came alive. They'd been under there the whole time. Hundreds of thousands of them. Bits of flesh and bone, little animals, squirrels and rats and people's pets ripped open and joined together into this one big living nut that was swarming with hands that had been turned into spiders or maybe they were just attached and they were just trying to grab a hold of the person. I don't remember. Cosgrove went down, screaming. He kept screaming until something like a centipede with a bobcat's head bit down into his throat.
Something big dragged him under the leaves, and that was it. Benetti was too out of it to scream. They dragged him under too. Another tentacle with fingers on it. I ran. I turned and went for Bomer. She was near the deadfall. Voight was telling her to go. His back was broken, and they were coming up out of the ground on that side too. She left him, and we both ran back to base. We were there. We were in the clearing when we heard Voight start screaming, begging us to come help him. We couldn't even if we wanted to. They were coming out of the woods. Not just the little ones, but bigger ones too. Mountain lions with no heads and arms attached to their shoulders. Deer with dog mouths. Spiders made of arms and heads. Big red bear things covered in hands, like something from hell. We were out of ammo, so all we could do was watch. I felt like crying, because I knew that they'd overtake the chopper and bring it down, but I couldn't. It was like I was too tired, too hurt to do more than just stand and watch as the sun set.
Then they left.
How did you know that?
Another survival group got mobbed by them after nightfall. My boss got the info online. I'm actually supposed to interview 2 of them tomorrow, and I think that's all I can say.
I understand. And yes, they all flew off, back into town. We didn't know what to do. It was so unexpected. But we weren't going to take it for granted. So we just barely managed to signal the copter, and we went home, as long as it lasted. I didn't talk to her.
What?
Bomer, I never got to talk to her. Those last months there, I was just caught up in trying to process what had happened, what the news was saying. My wife had given birth, and I couldn't feel happy because I was still reliving that day over and over. I knew Bomer wasn't doing well, worse than me. The whole ride back, she never said a word. She risked jail time because nobody could get her to talk about what she'd seen. I did the talking for us. Not that it was enough, and not that it mattered in the end. We still lost everything. She just stared off. The whole time, didn't talk until the day I was going up to Washington to give a statement at the federal courts. She hugged me, stared at me, and said, "We did the best that we could." And I knew that she didn't believe it. That was the last time I saw her. I didn't even know that she killed herself until after me and my family settled here. I was listening to the radio. A song that she used to like came on, and I remembered. I tried to call her up for a long time, and eventually I found her husband. And he told me that she'd...
You don't need to tell me. I'm sure my boss can, fill in the blanks.
Thanks. Is there anything else that you wanted to ask me?
No, I don't. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for your service.
Don't mention it.
Interview ended at 7:45, and recording ends now.